Hi there, how are you doing? I trust all is well. So this week's call will be relatively quick, I think. There's only a couple of items we need to go through. Before we get started, I'm just going to share our antitrust policy notice as usual. So if you have any questions, you can ask me or our counsel, Andy Updegrove, and the full antitrust policy notice can be found on the OpenChain website. Now I'm going to share the two major items I want to cover today. The first item relates to our industry survey. We've created this survey to help understand not only compliance and not only areas like OSPOs, but more generally how companies are engaging with open source right now. I think this survey will be super important. I think it will go far beyond our project, and I do hope that I can share it a lot, and I hope you can share it a lot so that as many people as possible fill it out. Now later today, I'll be advertising the survey online. It's in quite a few languages right now. Just sharing the web page to show you, and in the chat I'll put the link to this news item. So at the moment, it's just fantastic. We've got the survey in simplified and traditional Chinese, German, English, and Japanese. Obviously, it would be great to add more languages, but I think what we've got now is really enough to get things going. Having a look at, let's say, the English survey, we have a single page with all of the questions, and it covers everything from where you are, what type of organization, attitudes to open source, all the way going into more interesting figures from a pure business analytics perspective, like budgeting around OSPOs or virtual OSPOs, checking out full-time equivalent resources on open source strategy. We're also asking some of the questions that might be tougher, like why do people avoid open source? And of course, we're asking about criteria they use to select open source and how their organization has positioned itself over time. We do eventually get to license compliance. We do license compliance, export control, and security. We check automation. We check how often people do license compliance, export control, and security. And we do a check-in on mergers and acquisitions. Towards the end, we do talk about OpenChain and we do talk about SPDX, but we're capturing a lot of market stuff before that. And when it comes to the final thing that we're doing, we're checking out relationship management. I'm not a fan of normative statements around open source. And for instance, there's an assumption that the open source community means that everyone gets on better. But I want to check in the industry sense, has open source engagement improved supplier, customer, or competitor relationships? I assume, just like you, that it probably has, but we're checking it out. So that survey is a huge deal for us, and that's one of the main items I want to make sure is on your radar, and I really want your help in promoting it. The partners in the OpenChain ecosystem have been asked to put this survey through their sales channels. So I do hope that we will see a good uptake in the survey via those channels. Meanwhile, our community itself has been pretty busy filling it out. And in some places, like in Japan, we're set to have 100 responses by April 20th when they have their next Japan meeting. Okay, so that's item one that I wanted to put out there. Item two is, as you may have predicted, related to our security stuff. Our security assurance guide is now ready for comments. Oh, there's a question from Yari, which I'm going to answer before we move on. Survey, Twitter and LinkedIn, what else could be used to promote the survey? So if you're a member of mailing lists related to open source. I deeply appreciate if you could bring this up. Some of the best engagement we've got off surveys has been various groups that do something related to open source governance. So by way of example, I'm going to be going through the LinkedIn groups that I'm part of related to open source, and I'll be sharing the survey one by one there. But I think a lot of people are on mailing lists ranging from Linux user groups through to professional user groups, and that's very useful to share there. Question from Balakrishna. Hey, what's up?
Hi Shane. So I have a query here. So consider we want to convince an organization who's not very much aware of open chain, other than that there's a ISO standard out there from open chain about open source, right? What would be the key takeaway for them if they participate in this survey? How would it help them?
I think the key reason they should participate is because the survey itself is about snapshotting the industry stance towards open source. So by taking part in this survey, they'll be helping collect and get information, not just related to license compliance, but to how is open source performing on a business perspective? How is it working for people and how is it throwing challenges? So this is a very large scope for the survey. And the end result, the published result of the survey, will give companies a new metric to look at open source as a whole. And this is different from many other surveys because most surveys tend to obsess over some detail, like, are you using open source for development? Do you have an OSPO? What we're doing is we're saying, from a business intelligence perspective, where are you at with open source?
But then there are some questions where some people might hesitate to answer on. Is that
Yes,
fine?
that's totally fine. And I'm going to open up the survey again. And it's by design that the survey has not applicable and not sure at every question.
Mhm.
So we envision a situation where people will be comfortable with some things and not with others. So we expect that people will simply choose not applicable or not sure at anything that they're not comfortable with.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, and that, I mean, you raised a really good point. By design, we didn't want to force people into answering any question. We wanted to make every question mandatory, so people would have to make a choice. And that also will give us data. We might end up saying that, 30% of people did not want to talk about documented strategies regarding open source.
Yes.
And that will allow us to do further surveys in the future, which could be, is it because they don't have one, or they simply don't want to talk about that part of their business? And we can do that further research later.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I'm quite excited about the potential of this survey. I think that if we can solicit enough responses during April and May, we will end Q2 with something very useful for the whole market. Okay, let me switch to the next item on our agenda, which takes us back to our good old security guide. So the security guide is up on GitHub, and what's important about this is that now we're ready to take issues on GitHub. So we've moved from editing on these calls, discussing it on these calls, into the GitHub phase of life. And that's going to be significant. I've been sharing this document softly with our various sister projects and so on. But now, starting this week, it'll be promoted more and more heavily around the open chain community to catch people who don't make the calls and who don't necessarily pay attention to all of the emails. Long story short, we're pretty much looking ready to say that we have a complete security reference specification, a potential sister standard to OpenChain. And what we have to do in the next 2.5 months is to collect our thoughts on that, to check out what issues might be filed, and close the issues off ahead of a meeting of the steering committee of OpenChain. The meeting will take our recommendations and then vote. Are we making this a sister standard? Are we going to make it an optional part of our existing ISO standard? Will we just keep it as a reference document? That'll be the vote in about 2.5 months. So we have this period to open issues against it, comments about changing it, comments for it, comments against it, and provide the intelligence to our steering committee to make an informed decision at the end of this quarter. The steering committee is made up of the governing board members of OpenChain and the chair of the specification. The chair of the specification is Mark Giese. But everyone is entitled to sit in at the steering committee meeting when it's held and to see how it works and to offer comments and suggestions at that time as well. But ideally, we'll do it first here. Just pausing there to see if we've got any questions. Okay.
Shane,
Yeah.
a question. This security guide, basically, from whom we are looking for these additional comments, like all over the industry, or is this something that we should, everybody, let's say, promote on LinkedIn or Twitter or with our networks with security experts, or like what kind of eyeballs we are looking for?
The ideal two demographics would be people involved in OSPOs and people involved in security teams.
But all over the industry, basically.
All over the industry.
Okay.
And what we really want to do here is just to try and capture as many eyeballs as possible, so people can either, have no comment or like it or dislike it. If we end up going through the next 2 months or so of security and open source people looking at it, then we'll be able to say to the steering committee, we've had enough eyeballs on it to make a decision about where this document can go. I'll give you an example of what I'm doing. I've been socializing this document with the Open Source Security Foundation, and I expect to collaborate with them on sharing it through their channels to see if we can get good feedback from the security people they cover. I'm planning to consistently use OpenChain to promote and re-promote this, to try to make sure that across our community, everyone has a chance to read an email about this. But it would be super useful if you could approach your OSPO and security contacts and channels to also share that this document is on GitHub and that we're soliciting comments right now.
Perfect. Just a question. You mentioned that you are going to promote this. Like, for example, it's super easy if there's a, I don't know, LinkedIn or tweet, right, and then, just I can, retweet or
Absolutely.
reshare that.
So my plan for promoting this more extensively, we've been promoting it with baby steps to make sure we haven't made a horrible mistake. It's been going well. I will be putting a news item up on our website to promote it. So just in the same way as the survey is here, I'll put the security item here again. We've done it before, but I'll do it again. And I'll promote that web page with the latest news about the security thing across all of our channels. And if you could take those and echo, it would be great.
Perfect. Thanks.
And so Shane, if the ultimate intention is that the decision is made that this does become part of the OpenChain standard as an option, how does that work with ISO? So presumably then there's a sort of a process that it needs to go through to be formally approved in the same way as OpenChain itself.
Correct. So what would happen if we decided to fold this in as an optional component to OpenChain or similar would be that we would ask Joint Development Foundation to take the information and ratify it and then submit it to ISO as an update. But the process is quite straightforward because rather than granting permission to have it as a formal standard, we're just updating an existing standard. And the timelines should be similar to last time, in the region of 9 months or so.
Yeah. Okay. That's
However,
great,
I would say that I personally think, and I would personally prefer, if we actually release this as a sister specification.
Mm-hmm.
I think that will be neater, cleaner, tidier, and it fits more into how the industry will probably use this. We have people asking for export control. So we might end up with little family of incredibly closely related specifications, but clearly delineated.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thanks.
That's what I'll be trying to suggest we should do. But of course, it's in the hands of the steering committee, not me. So we'll see where they go. If the steering committee voted to make this a sister specification, then in July, it would be out as a de facto standard. And it would be in the same position as OpenChain in the 2016 to 2020 period. Over time, a year or 2 years or so, the standard might then be submitted to ISO as well. But all of that lies ahead. If it was decided to make an optional component of the existing standard, you'd probably be looking at somewhere in middle 2023, an updated version of ISO 5230. And more feasibly, if they decided, oh, we'll just keep it as a reference standard, then just in July, it would just be finished as a reference spec and just left there. I do hope we'll release it as an industry spec. I think so far the feedback has been very positive from every direction. And there are reasons for that. I mean, we had significant contributions from Chris Wood over at Lockheed to tidy this up and keep it tight. So I think that really helped us with the security domain.
Yeah, great, thanks.
You're welcome. And mental modeling, looking ahead towards end of this year. As we enter Q4 of this year, I expect that not only will we cover license compliance comprehensively as always, our security work will have a very solid foundation, ideally a de facto standard. And we should be at that stage a few months into the release of either a guide or a reference specification on export control as well. So you can expect our portfolio of coverage on the compliance domain to range from license compliance to security compliance to export control compliance within this year. Right, and those are the two main items I wanted to go over. There is one more item which has to be finished, and that is the education training course. And that's on my plate. There's stuff I have to do to get this ready for LF training. But the training team, Balakrishna in particular, have got all the stuff basically ready. There's a few items for me to do and to get it onto the training schedule. I expected to do it last week. I do confess I am late here, but I expect to get it done this week, at latest next week, and I'll be sitting down with the training people in early May as well in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm hopeful that our training course, our second training course, will be released in May. Balakrishna, over to you.
Thank you, Shane. And yes, we are looking forward for the second course to be launched. I think we have most of the things already ready, as Shane mentioned. Now, if you would have seen our previous emails, now finally the course is in the final draft review stage, and 15th would be the last date of performing all the reviews. Everyone in OpenChain education group main list, everyone can access the document. Please let us know if you cannot access the document. You can access the document, go through the course, and drop your comments if anything is not very clear, or if something has to be explained better, or if even if as much as enhancing the images to a better pixel, you can definitely let us know. This time we have had enormous help from Yari and Martin, who have been helping us in curating the course better in terms of language and the images, making it more easier for everyone to access it and understand it. So we are trying to make it more and more easy this time, and we request everyone to drop some comments into the document wherever you feel necessary. That's it from my side. Thank you.
That's brilliant. And I'm just going to see if I can pull up our link here for contributions. Apologies for my slowness on this. So many messages. Okay. I'm going to have to send the link out afterwards. I can't find it immediately into the document itself. So I think it would be something I'll just send out post this call to make sure that people can jump on and have a look. I just found it. I'm putting it into the chat right now. Your assistance on this, as always, is super appreciated. I'm including Balakrishna's last email in the post. Right, and with that, we have covered the news items. The survey is something we really want pushed because it will give us probably one of the best insights into the industry in the last few years. 2, the security thing is a big deal, and it is a prelude to taking us into other domains as well, like export control. If you put them all together, you can see that OpenChain is positioning itself to own the open source compliance space. And that goes not only on license compliance, but other areas. And the reason we're moving into this positioning is simple. It's because the market keeps asking us to. So help us do a good job there, and positive or negative comments on the security document will be vital for making sure the steering committee makes a good decision when they meet at the end of June. And there we have it. Thank you so much for your time. Unless there's any other business, I shall free you to do your other endeavors for the rest of the day.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shane.
Take care all. Be well.
Okay, bye all.